So isn't it ironic that the very first Korean ever was mixed?
It's a halfie.
Half bear woman and half heavenly god.
Yeah, that's a weird mix, but
Yeah.
it is ironic.
Hi, everybody, and welcome back to the Halfway Project podcast. My name is Becky. Sitting across from me at the table is Cedric Sky City. And if this is your first time tuning in, we talk about the mixed race experience. And as both of us are half Korean and we're currently living here in Seoul, South Korea, we focus primarily on the mixed Korean race experience. And today, we are doing a topic that is perfectly in line with who we are. If you were tuning in for the last two episodes, you will know that we have done a brief overview of the terms hapa and hafu. And today we're bringing it back to the motherland. We are discussing the term honhyeol. Honhyeol.
Yeah. Today, I'm very excited. I learned a lot really just researching for this.
Yeah,
So.
I'm really excited too. Actually, I feel kind of sad that we can't get into it even deeper than we want to. It's just that there's so much to undiscover, discover, unveil, and to, dig into. So though this episode is going to be sorely lacking in all of the things we could be discussing concerning the term honhyeol, it will be a good overview, I think. Kind of like dipping your toes into the water, and then as the episodes continue on, we're going to dive in deeper.
Yeah.
And swim through the ocean.
It's pretty much a primer.
Of this mixed Korean experience. So that's what we're doing. And also, guys, if you're wondering why I'm like, all right, let's get the show on the road, it's because I'm DJing tonight on a boat party. So I'm pretty excited for that.
I'll be there.
You're going to be there. Your mic is a little bit low. Is that okay? I guess you just have a big voice.
Yeah, I'll just speak loudly today. Because this stand is sort of... Oh, there it is. Oh, now it's working.
Good.
There
Great.
we go.
It's
a little better.
That's how technology works. It's kind of like cats. It does whatever you don't want it to do. Well, as we mentioned, we're talking about honhyeol today. And do you want to share a little bit, I guess, of the actual word meaning? honhyeol. What does that mean?
Well, it means mixed blood, essentially. And so it's really rooted in the whole concept or idea or theory about racial or ethnic mixing. Like, for example, if you have two different ethnic groups, like one mom is from, I don't know, Asia, another mom, or
before we talk about that, maybe we need to explain how babies are made.
Right. So one parent is from like Asia, right?
Yeah.
And the other parent's from, Europe or something like that. Technically the idea behind mixed blood is you have a mixing of those bloods.
Yes.
And so it's, it's something that is still in the, I guess, it's in the bloodline of the Korean thought and philosophy.
Oh, the bloodline of the Korean thought.
I tried. You saw what I did there?
Yeah, you put those together.
Yeah, it didn't come out smoothly, but you know what I mean.
I get what you're saying.
Yeah.
You're right. honhyeol in itself, the word itself is Korean, or Hanja, which is kind of like the Chinese character basis. Hon, which used for like mixed. We have the word hun when we have many words that mean like mixed or crossover or something, or complicated hun. And then we have hyol, which is literally like blood. So honhyeol put together in itself is kind of a neutral term that means mixed blood. That's what it is. honhyeol. And you're right. It is sort of, I guess, stemming from this bloodline purity mindset that has existed in Korea for a very long time.
Right.
And before we actually talk about honhyeol, the people, honhyeol, mixed blood people, I think we got to talk about this pure bloodline mindset.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think so. And it goes back hundreds of years.
It goes way back.
Yeah. So I think you're going to enlighten us today.
Okay. Do you want to do our go backing in time sound effect? Here you go, guys. We're going to go way back in time to 2333 BC.
Oh.
Wow, here we are in ancient Korea.
Wow,
So
it looks quite empty.
There is nothing here.
It's my acting skills.
Yeah, well, welcome here to ancient Korea. And we're going to be heading back to even before when the first Korean kingdom or dynasty was created. There was a man named Tangun Wangam. Tangun Wangam is the legendary founder, the legendary first man of the Korean bloodline. And he was the founder and god king of Gojoseon. Gojoseon was the first Korean dynasty, which was established in 2333 BC or 2333 BC. 2333 BC? There's got to be a nice
long time ago.
A long time ago. Don't get this mixed up with Joseon dynasty. That's why it's Gojoseon, which is old Joseon dynasty. So the story goes, and it's somewhat of a myth, I think. Hwanin was Lord of Heaven, and he had a son named Hwanung, who wanted to live among the mountains and the valleys. He didn't want to live in heaven anymore. Who wants to go there nowadays? And so Hwanung decided he came to Earth. And he was living kind of at Baektusan, so mountain Baektu, where he founded the city of God. And there he made laws, he made moral codes, he taught the humans art and medicine, agriculture of the heavens, right? And they even say acupuncture, the art and science of acupuncture, goes all the way back to this time. Mm-hmm. So at that time, there was a tiger and a bear that lived around the mountain, and they prayed to Hwanung. They said, please let us be a human, I want to be a human. So he gave them both garlic and mugwort, suk, suk. Mm-hmm. And he said, you cannot go into the sun, and you must only eat this garlic and mugwort for 100 days. The tiger got tired eventually of it, but the bear persevered, and she became a woman. So she was transformed into a woman by Hwanung. Well, her name was Ungnyo, and she had no husband, she had no son, because, well, she was bear before, so now she's a woman. So she would pray fervently to Hwanung to have a son. And so he was so moved by her prayers that he married her, and they had a son who became Tangun Wangam, who then went on to found Gojoseon. So isn't it ironic that the very first Korean ever was mixed?
It's a halfie.
Half bear woman and half heavenly god.
Yeah, that's a weird mix, but yeah, it is ironic.
It is ironic. And so this is kind of like, if you go way back, where does the great bloodline of Korea start? It starts here with Tangun Wangam. And this is a very interesting point that South Korea is kind of like, a legendary mix or myth. In North Korea, they will say he's a real person, that this was really how our people came from. Really? And so actually they have a site in North Korea that some North Korean archaeologists will say this is his real grave. Mm-hmm. So it's very controversial. But as you can see, North Korea and South Korea still, like way back, even legendary myth form, believe that they're from the same person.
Right. Wow.
And that is the story. Tangun.
I mean, obviously the Koreas weren't divided until recently, so obviously they would share the same myth, for centuries and centuries, but I'm sure there was a divergence, obviously, after the Korea split, in terms of how that myth or how that story is perceived. Right.
Yeah, I'm going to go around and ask some of my friends, like, hey, do you know Tangun? What do you think of him? Is he your great-great-great-great-great-great-grandfather? And see what they say. Because it's kind of like legend,
As you were reading that, I am reminded of, because I didn't grow up like hearing these Korean folk tales. At least I don't remember.
I remember this one. My mom had books and we read this one.
I mean, I remember hearing about this maybe 2 years ago. I feel like I was in Korea and I heard this story because as soon as you said maneul or garlic, that's when I remembered. I was like, oh, I heard this before. Obviously, I don't remember details, but so it is something that is still told today.
Yes. And this kind of, I guess, lays like maybe a very long time ago, foundation of this Korean ethnic nationalism, which is a political ideology that we share a unified bloodline and unified culture. Right. And have you heard the word 민족?
민족.
Right. 민족. You've probably heard 민족 a lot. Okay. Honestly. 민족 just basically means like, it's like one people, like 민족, like the people group, our people. 민족, you've probably heard the term 민족, and it was a word that was coined actually in imperial Japan. You know, when you were talking about hafu, and they were saying they were the I think minjoku is like the term they were using. Minjok, like the one people. It's based basically on social Darwinism, honestly, where it's like, you know, dog eat dog world, I guess, you know, the
survival of the fittest.
Survival of the fittest. So minjok, we're the best people, the best bloodline. So we're a unified bloodline, a unified culture. And this kind of came out when Japan, imperialist Japan, was trying to colonize and assimilate Koreans into Japan, in Japanese culture. Right? And it was a way to justify their trying to make them stop speaking Korean, trying to give them Japanese names. Like my grandmother lived through that time, you know, your grandmother lived through that time. And saying we're all from the same stock. Hey, we are all same one people. Japan was saying that. And there was an author who wrote a book. And let me pull this up. Okay, so...
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, so in this time, when Japan was trying to colonize Korea and this imperialistic Japanese imperialism, Shin Chae-ho was an essayist and an author, and he wrote a book that was Joseon Sangosa, which basically meant like the history of Joseon kind of thing.
Right, and that was what, like early 1900s, right?
Yeah, early like 1920-something, I think, came out, maybe 1926. And he wrote this history where there were a people group called the Minjok who fought very bravely to maintain their Korean identity, preserve their Korean identity. And said that like, oh, over time it kind of declined, but now we must bring it back. And so it popularized this idea of Minjok, Korean ethnic identity. On one hand, we look at it now and say, thanks to this ideal of Minjok, the Korean people were able to fight back against imperialistic Japan and maintain this Korean culture and identity. That's a huge thing. And certainly we greatly reap benefits of that today and can say, yeah, we have Korean culture, Korean food, you know, Korean names, Korean language has survived. But now, of course, we can see there are some echoing repercussions of this. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. I was thinking the same thing, because had the nation of Korea, while it was in the occupation of Japan, had they succumbed to, I guess, the ideology that Japan was trying to enforce on them,
we're the same line.
We wouldn't even be here, you and I.
We'd be speaking Japanese, probably.
Right.
Oh, we wouldn't even look like us.
I mean, technically, we wouldn't be born.
We wouldn't even be us.
Right. But yeah, I get it. Yeah. So, I mean, that is a great thing. I think, you know, in certain times, especially times of struggle, times of captivity, I guess, when a nation or a people group feels captive, they need something. They need a hope, or they need some sort of like a confidence booster. That's the most simplistic way I could like put it. There's a much stronger term for it, I'm sure, but they need something that gives them that identity and gives them that strength to resist what they need to resist and to fight back. And
but that's like in Korea, uri. It's the sense of uri. Right. Us, uri.
It's a collective like power. It's almost a similar concept as like in sports and teams, you know what I mean? Because as a team, you have that collective mindset and you're much better able to defeat your opponent or be on the same wavelength and play together.
That's right.
Yeah. So I think that is something that came into play.
Yeah.
It was obviously a much bigger situation than a basketball game.
Sure.
You know, but so I think that's a good thing that came out of Minjok.
That's right, Minjok. So this mindset of Minjok. Now, this has some very familiar strands to some other things we might know, like ultranationalism or Nazism. Japan and Germany after World War II, well, we know with World War II, there was the rise of ultranationalism and Nazism. And after World War II, when those countries were defeated, of course, it went away. There was a very negative mindset or perception towards Nazism, of course, eugenics, and this ultranationalistic thing. But South Korea and North Korea kind of kept that up, kept up this sense of Minjok. After the Korean War, there was President Lee Seung-man, right? Lee Seung-man.
Yeah.
Depending on who you ask, some people think Lee Seung-man was an incredible leader. He was obviously very educated. He traveled to Western countries, and he did great things for the nation of Korea after World War II, after the Korean War, when they were establishing a democracy here in South Korea. But at the same time, he really pushed this ideology of like 단일 민족, one people, one common bloodline, racial purity. And this was at significant odds with what happened simultaneously during the Korean War and post the Korean War. And that was the rise of mixed Korean children because of American soldiers and Korean women who were working around the base.
Right.
So you can see politically this mindset of 민족, 단일 민족, racial purity, but what was really happening in the society. So one group or the other was going to have to lose out here. And we know that it was the honhyeolin, the mixed kids, that definitely lost out after the Korean War.
Right. So, I mean, you got to think about it like from I try to have empathy when I think about people groups. And even if I totally disagree with their perspectives or paradigms, I try to see how they see it and try to understand why they see it. I mean, you got to think about Korea. For centuries, Korea is known for being just such a peaceful country, never actually on record
going out and invading.
Right, invading or fighting. Defending is one thing, but very peaceful country, a country always to themselves. It's also known as the hermit country, right? And you have just you have a nation that is just minding their own business, and then you're constantly being attacked. And I'm talking about over a span of centuries, constantly being attacked or invaded, because think about where Korea is. Right. It's the peninsula between Japan and mainland China. And so Korea was just always like that bullied middle child.
Yeah, I can relate.
Right. So, with this sort of history and this sort of trauma, you can sort of understand after post-war, you can understand post-war where this ideology really began to just shine. And one thing that I will say is, even though this sort of mindset of the perfect race, not the perfect race, but like pure blood, and, we are a people of our own, we're, in a sense, it is like we're better than other people, whether it's admitted or not. The one thing that I'll say is, typically it's always like peaceful. It's manifested peacefully. It's not in a sense of trying to push somebody down, but kind of to protect. Right? Like, we have to keep ourselves well. Right. So it's healthy. Yeah, it's like a defense mechanism. Right. And it makes sense, honestly. Like with imperialistic Japan at the time, they were saying, hey, we're the same race. We're the same stock. Like this is what they were saying in order to make assimilation okay. But still there was, because of this mindset of, but we're still better than you. Yeah. And so naturally Korea fought back, pushed back against that. And so, I understand what you're saying. You can definitely sympathize with that. And there is, and we see it today manifested in how Korea is preventing coronavirus spread, right? This centralized 우리 protection kind of mechanism. That is one true. Mindset, that is one true. Culture. I mean, I kid you not. You and I, we've walked by restaurants, specifically one that I'm thinking of in Yeonnam-dong, and I can't name it because I'll probably get sued and deported because of defamation laws here. But there is this one restaurant, pretty sizable restaurant, and they literally had a sign saying "No foreigners allowed." And I've seen a lot of these signs pop up online, and people are like foreigners in our like foreigner group, or showing like different pictures of like places that are saying no foreigners. But this one went out of their way to post a big banner. They printed a banner. They had a banner designed and made. Yeah. Right. Yeah. In English and in Chinese and in Korean. Right. And as much as, because I remember first seeing that really, angered me, of course. Yeah. Immediate, your gut response. But, when I think about it, to your point, it feels like they're protecting themselves more so than just discriminating just to discriminate. I mean, I'm not justifying it because I know a lot of them are, let's be real, they're racist, but I think it stems from wanting to protect themselves more so than harm. 우리나라, 우리 민족, 우리, us, our country, people. Our people, right? It's a very strong mindset that's here. Let's hop back to the 1950s. It's like 1953, after Korean War was ending or the armistice was formed. Now we had something called the honhyeol 문제. It was an actual term coined to describe the problem of mixed race kids. honhyeol 문제. It was such a significant issue and at huge odds with what the government was trying to promote. This racial purity, we are, one people. Then you have mixed race kids happening. That was due specifically because of these American soldiers and the bases. They were called GI babies. And there's a big generation of them that grew up as orphans
or were sent abroad to be adopted. This was a time when there was a huge wave of international adoptions happening out of Korea specifically to the US. And so that question was raised now in retrospect. Is it better to have had these children who are mixed race Koreans to suffer in Korea, at least in their own nation, at least with one parent who is still there? Or is it better for them to be sent overseas where they also don't quite fit and they'll be known as orphan children that were adopted, being raised by someone who is not their real parents, right? So this was a question that I think people in retrospect were asking, but at the time, President Lee Seung-man was referring to these honhyeol kids as garbage that needed to be taken care of, even if thrown into the ocean, were his words. Man. And so they systematically, the government was trying to push out honhyeol, mixed children, to be out of the country because it didn't fall ideologically with what they were trying to do politically as a new democracy. And also it represented this the racial disparities and this problem, their kind of failure to take care of their people. Honestly, it's like there's a lot of things that were factors to the negativity towards mixed children at that time. And you can see that the repercussions of that still last today. You know that in 1975, I think, they actually instituted a law that mixed Korean men who were born and raised in Korea were exempted from the military as a kind of way to encourage them to not live in Korea and to find work overseas. Right. If they couldn't get adopted when they were younger, instead of giving an opportunity for mixed race men to be part of the society here, as we talked about in a previous episode, the military is extremely important for Korean men. Instead of allowing that to be part of the culture and become one of us in Korea, they would say, like, you don't have to go to Korean military. There's a law that exempts you. You know what? We're going to give you special training so that you can find work overseas. Isn't that better for you? But as you can still see, it's a backhanded way to get rid of mixed Korean men at that time. So this carried on for a long time. So when people ask us, like, oh, how come Korea is so racist against mixed Koreans? How come you can't fit in, blah, 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 blah? If you look at the history, it kind of makes sense. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I'm, as a mixed race person living in Korea and really seeing firsthand the subtle racism on a day-to-day basis almost, like, yeah, it makes me upset, but at the same time, I understand. And I think understanding is more important than just getting mad and reacting, because once you understand, that's where you can really know how to position yourself with the dialogue and really know how to position your logic, because this thinking isn't really based in logic. You know what I mean? It doesn't really make sense. Like, this pure blood theory isn't based in logic or science. It's more so based on just an ideology that has been instilled, in the culture. And even to this day is still there. And I think it's slowly breaking away from it, but I think it's still far. It's a generation at least or two removed from actually, not having this ideology in society. Right. Yeah, but it's because of this understanding that I think we can actually level with people and have a conversation that's not like, oh my gosh, why are you so racist? That's right. You need to change. That's right. They're like, because they think they're right. They feel like they're right. Yeah, and nobody has ever won an argument by saying, you're wrong, boom, right? You have to sympathize with that person and try to understand the point of view. And that's what we're trying to do here on this podcast. It's so easy to look at wrongs that are happening to honhyeolin all around us and say, oh, Korea, how could you, Korea, something, and find somebody to blame. But I mean, this is not solving anything. And in reality, you just need understanding and some compassion and empathy, and then just be able to sit down and talk about it. Because in reality, honhyeol is still a rather touchy subject here in Korea, even to today. If you think about it, a lot of these changes that are happening for multicultural families, multinational families here, these laws that are being changed are very recent. It was only until the 2000s when people started paying attention to the needs of multinational families. In the 1990s, there was a big influx of immigrant workers, migrant workers, immigrant women coming to marry Korean men, and we still see that coming and continuing on to today. but there were no laws in place to protect these families. People were not really paying attention to racial tensions or attacks.
Right.
And so it's quite recent when people started paying attention to multicultural families. Prior to that, it was kind of like, a case-by-case situation.
Right.
It was only in 2010 when the Korean army got rid of the oath where Korean soldiers would swear allegiance to the Korean race.
Right.
Is that crazy to me? Like, it's not even to the Korean nation. Not like I pledge allegiance like to protect the nation. It's to the Korean race.
Right.
And it was in 2010 when that oath was no longer instituted.
Yeah, I read about that.
Yeah. I found that very interesting.
But I mean, it's great. At least that's a step forward. As late as it may seem, it's a step forward.
That's right. And we're in a very unique time to be living through all of this and seeing the changes happening and having a voice.
Yeah, so as we're talking about Korean as a nationalistic type of society, there is actually a professor at Yonsei. I don't know if he's still there, but there's a quote that I found.
Wait, who's the professor?
His name is Kim Hyunmi. Kim Hyunmi. Yeah.
At Yonsei?
Yonsei.
Okay. Has he been there for a while? Yonsei was my school, that's why.
Yeah, I know.
I'm wondering. Okay, anyway. Continue.
Yeah. I wish I could have gotten a little bit more information, but he's quoted as saying this, and I thought this was really interesting. He says, one of the most serious side effects of the country's rapid economic development is that its people started to hierarchize foreign nations according to their economic status. Collectively, they would perceive specific nations, mostly developed countries, such as the US and the UK, as their superiors whom they should learn from. Just think about how Korea is obsessed with the English language education. So while perceiving economically developing countries as their inferiors with no specific grounds. I thought this was interesting because it shows you economically sort of why Korea has this sort of mindset that as a nation they feel better or they feel stronger than other nations. Because if you think about it, Korea in a span of less than 50 years, I want to say 30 years, has gone from post-war one of the poorest countries in the world to one of the richest in a matter of just a couple of decades. Not even up until today. I'm talking like 2 decades ago. And this sort of, I guess, all hands on deck sort of approach, like builds and instills pride because they did it on their own.
That's right.
They were
literally on their own, like pulling out gold teeth and selling that to the government to buy the country out of debt.
Yeah, in the 90s. Yeah. I mean, that's something that we could like get into at another time. But, so you think about this, Korea, one of the poorest nations, and of course, a lot with the help of the U.S. military in the early days, in the wartime era, built up this country, and as a, I guess, inferior country at that point, looking to other countries like the U.S. that are, one of the leaders in the world. You can see why after Korea has achieved their certain status that they would have this sort of like prideful mindset.
Sure.
We did this, we built this together as a country, and we didn't really have too much help from the outside, and you can see economically where this mindset is sort of reinforced. And it's true. I got to give props to Korea because I've read somewhere that Korea accomplished in 30 years what a developed nation like the U.S. has accomplished in 100. That's insane.
It's really remarkable.
Right.
Yeah.
And so even it's not just racial aspects of society that reinforces this mindset. It's also the economics of it.
Well, jumping on top of that, so you're saying they would prize nations like UK or US, right? This is reflected on how the society also views certain ethnic groups.
Yeah.
This is why Eurasians are so exotic and special and lucky when Filipino Koreans, Kopinos, are looked down upon. Right? Because Korea as a nation is doing better than the Philippines.
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly. And I'm glad you said that because I have another quote from Professor Hyunmi Kim.
Okay.
And he says, Korean racism also contains internalized white supremacy After the Korean War, Korea became a country with the U.S. military presence. At the same time, it was exposed to American popular culture.
That's right.
And that included Hollywood films, and it was influenced by the U.S.'s representation of visible minorities. And so you could see where this whole white supremacy sort of mindset, and when I say white supremacy, I mean Korea really overall, what do you call it? Like lifts up the white man, right? Looks up to the white man, but then looks down on the minorities, you know, especially other Asians, you know, but even like black minorities, whether from America or from Africa. So you can see how even during the time of the military being here, the U.S. military, how these negative stereotypes and like discriminatory attitudes and racist thoughts and attitudes where it stemmed from, you know? So it's so layered. There's so much to it.
It's incredibly layered. And of course, the reason why we feel more I guess emotional about this topic is because it directly relates to us. And there's a whole lot to break down on this. And especially, you know, talking about the influences the American military had on Korea and Korean culture and still repercussions to today. We will get into that on some other YouTube videos. If you keep watching this channel, we are working with an organization that's specifically talking about those influences. So stay tuned for those. But yeah, we can see that in particular to how now mixed race people are viewed in Korea. Like we just touched on ahead, if you have one parent who's Korean and one parent who's a migrant worker from, say, Southeast Asia, the way that those children are viewed is significantly different than, say, if your mom is from Australia and your dad is Korean, the child has white skin, you know, and speaks English and all of this. You can see how this disparity surely exists to today.
Right. And I don't even know if many Koreans realize that. I think it's subconscious to many. Some do.
Sure, yeah. After a while, I feel like, it gets internalized. It really does. You can see there's no education on this point. And like we have in the US, people are saying like, you should educate people on Black history, you know, African American history. You should, so that we can prevent this continuing cycle of racism. But we don't see this happening in Korea, when there's certainly also racist tendencies among society and the political thinking. And so it's no wonder that it carries on, but it's not necessarily in the forefront of people's minds. Maybe it's not so conscious.
Right.
Yeah. Gosh, I don't even know where to go from that point, because there's just so much to unravel here.
Right.
I think this episode is more like to touch back onto this topic of honhyeol and mixed race in Korea. And the podcast will continue to talk and dissect more specific points or people or events that are all connected to this this topic of honhyeol that we have discussed today, which I guess makes it, very significant. This is the Happy Project after all.
Right.
And yeah, so this is more what we will discuss. I had so many notes about, you know, the Christian missionaries who started paying attention to mixed Koreans, the first orphanage that was established here, the first school that mixed children were allowed to go to, the Amerasian Act in the 1980s that were giving children citizenship rights in the US. There's so much to discuss about this topic, but we are going to have to save it for some other episodes. And we hope that you guys will show some interest in this and ask us to specifically, hey, I would like to know whatever happened to these kids, or did you ever discover about the Holt family and their orphanage? Or, you know, if you have specific questions as well, we hope that you'll send them to us. Now, I don't want to mean like, okay, let's wrap up, but is there something else that you wanted to add on this topic?
No, because I feel like it'll open up a whole nother can.
I know, it's so much stuff.
Yeah. But one thought, and I'd like to see what you think. But you know, going back to what you said earlier about the term honhyeol and mixed blood, as it's translated, you know, it has to many a negative connotation. For others, it's more of a like just an objective,
like a description.
Term. Yeah. You know, I started. Like my mindset after sort of researching and thinking about this, my mindset started to shift a little bit. And I haven't found or solidified an answer or a way I feel about this term, but like, how do you feel about, because you oftentimes you describe yourself as that. Sure. when you say you're mixed, when you tell people you're mixed. Yeah. And I've even used that in a lot of my YouTube videos dealing with being mixed. So is this like, has your perspective on this word or term changed?
Has it changed?
Yeah.
To be honest, no. But I do think that's because I'm part of a certain generation that has been taking this term in a more neutral manner. Because prior, I would say maybe 1 or 2 generations before us, I think people shied away from the term honhyeol and instead were fighting for the right to be part of the 민족. To be more like, I'm just Hangulkin, I'm just Korean. Why do you have to define me as honhyeol? So you will find an older generation that does not like the term honhyeol because it was very separating. In fact, to deal with the honhyeol 문제, the problem of mixed race kids, the government had set up a separate bureau to deal with honhyeol problems, right? And people who were living here as mixed race were like, why do we need to have a separate bureau? Like, are we not part of your people? And so that bureau eventually was set away with, but it was specifically to do with the term honhyeol and this dividing, separating factor. But what I feel about it now is that it is inevitable. Wherever I go in Korea, the question is always, 우리나라 사람 아니죠? Like, you're not one of our people, right?
Right.
This is always the question asked to me. And so instead of me fighting and saying like, yes, I am, look at me, I am, you're being judgmental, right? Better, I usually just say like, oh, I'm honhyeol. I'm not disagreeing with you, but I'm also not agreeing with you. In fact, I'm honhyeol. I'm both, I'm mixed. And people seem to take the term and be like, I get it. honhyeol, okay. And then they decide what to do with that, deciding, well, then you're one of our people, or to say, so you're a foreigner. And it's kind of like giving them that choice because I can't fight it with every single person I meet.
Right.
Because it's such a pervasive mindset. If you don't look Korean, you're not Korean. So in using the term honhyeol, me, myself, I feel quite like, it's my word. It's what I am. I'm honhyeol. And I don't find it to be derogatory. But then again, I might be part of this generation that grew up using this term in a not so derogatory way.
I mean, it's very similar to the hapa term.
Right, hapa.
The difference of generations perceiving that term and using the term.
Sure. I would say more like hafu and daburu, right? People saying, but I'm double, so I'm daburu. I don't want to use hafu. Hafu. But it was like what that guy was saying. It's not the word itself. It's what meaning you give to the word. And so I wonder, honhyeol, like, maybe this term will be phased out eventually as the Korean society becomes more and more mixed. But regardless, it will take time, and I've shared my thoughts on that personally. I would be sad if every single person was mixed, I think, like to such an extent that we don't have a strong sense of ethnic identity. But then again, like, who am I to say?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's very complicated and layered. And we'll talk more about this, I think. But do you like to use the word honhyeol for yourself?
It really depends. I like the way you articulated it. I was starting to feel like, maybe just by using the word, I'm saying that I am different, reinforcing the idea. So if I were to describe myself as mixed blood,
I feel like we can't run away from that.
At the same time, I am different. I can't deny that. You know what I mean? So it could be just an internal thing to try to be on the same, like, not level, but just be like, to find that commonality. And if I use that term, maybe it gives a distance or a separation.
It's so weird. Like, it's so weird when you're in group settings. You notice this. Sometimes when I'm in group settings, depending on whom I'm with, some person will be like, oh, wow, you know how to drink well. You are like a Korean.
Right.
We'll say that, right? Then the person sitting next to me will be like, she is Korean. And then he'll be like hastily, of course I know that.
Right.
Right. And it's kind of,
Didn't that happen last night?
It happened last night. You were there. And I feel like there's just this constant like clashing of like trying to recognize like what they're seeing and what's actually happening.
Right.
And they're like, oh, why you're a foreigner who's speaking Korean. Oh, okay. How surprising. But you don't need to say that, right? So we still have a very strong sense of the pure bloodline and what looks Korean versus what is now being Korean with the mixed generation and the rise of multicultural families. Yeah, it's a curious case, and we're living right in the middle of it. This is a very unique time in Korea, and in the past, after the war, we saw that the government, instead of taking the time to tackle these racial problems head on and helping to create a culture of acceptance, they decided to throw the mixed children away. Now I feel we are living in another very significant time like this. And I think the Korean government and society has a responsibility to decide how they're going to handle that. Are we going to have acceptance and growing in a culture where a multicultural society can still be Korean? Or are we still going to pursue the sense of, you know, one people? And what's that going to happen to the next generation?
Right. That's true.
So it's kind of a cliffhanger, and that's where we're going to end the episode here. And we'll keep talking about it in future episodes. I'm already looking forward to our next recording.
Same.
So any final words for our people?
I will just say that we are all one human race.
Look at you,
and
so
let's just
diplomatic.
live together in harmony and love.
Yeah, you're gonna be next Miss America.
I hope so. That'd be
World
dope.
peace.
Yo, I'm gonna challenge all the like stereotypes
Yeah.
and the definition of these norms that are in place.
Looking forward to that. Anyway, thanks so much for listening, you guys. If you have any comments or questions concerning this episode, you can either leave it in the comments below if you're watching this on YouTube. If you're tuning into our podcast, you can always get in touch at emailing us at thehaveitproject@gmail.com. A quick plug for George's Corner. We're going to have a couple messages from George next week. So you guys look forward to that. George is having a great time tuning in. I always listening to this one as well. And if you want to learn more about George, just listen to some of our previous episodes where we describe who he is. So thanks for tuning in, you guys. Remember to send us a couple messages and hope to see you next week. We are The Happy Project.